So hello everyone, welcome to this another video of Scale Up India. In this video we are going to discuss about exception handling in Java. Now as always, first of all let's understand why do we need exception handling. Now assume that you have created a particular website with the UI in Angular or React and the backend is in Java or maybe in some other language also, but here our main focus will be on Java. So you are asking the username and password and then you are allowing the user to log in. So let's say the username is Scale Up India and password is something like this. Obviously it's not a good practice to show the password directly. Now the user clicks the login button and instead of the home page, user see something like this. Now this is an exception. So maybe what can have occurred here in the backend. So maybe as per this particular username, we must have fetched in the database. From the database, we were not able to find the username, but then also we tried to access some other variables for that username and hence we got something like this, a null pointer exception. So maybe in your simple applications also you must have faced something like this. Now you may say that yes, we have faced, and here it is the problem of the UI. UI should have shown some better page instead of something like this. But is it the only problem of UI? The answer is no. This is not a basic problem from the UI and instead it's a problem with our backend. And let's say here the backend has been created with Java. So in the backend, first of all, the main purpose we should do here is that instead of directly checking for the username in the database and then later on fetching the variables and other things with that particular username, we must have first of all fetched from the database. From there, if we must have got the null, then we should have applied some null check things and we should have shown that okay, the user is not found or something like this. So this is one of the common mistakes which we do, and hence we call that null pointer exception is a runtime exception. But still, this doesn't mean that you are not going to handle this. You should always handle it. The reason that why we should handle is because here we are telling in this way the customer or probably the hacker that what all things we are using. So here we are telling the hacker that okay, we are going to use Apache Tomcat and here our method is something like check login. The file name is database.java. There is some issue on line number 82. So in some way we are trying to tell the hacker or the customer what all things we are using here. We are telling him or her everything about our code, which is completely wrong. So this should not have occurred here. Now imagine that somehow the Scale Up India was able to log in and the username was found, and then we show different files. So here we are just listing the files and some folders from the database, and then we say the user that okay, you click on any of the files and then we will show you the contents of the file. So user has clicked on our first file and instead of checking the contents, we are showing again something like this. Now this is a file not found exception. Now here this file not found exception, we say this is something like a checked exception in the backend. So we will discuss about those unchecked and checked exceptions later on also, but this is a checked exception. In the Java, we should always handle such kind of exceptions. But here what might have gone wrong is that maybe we have handled the exception, but instead of throwing some better message, some user-friendly message, we are directly throwing the exception itself to the user. So again, this is also wrong because again we are telling the customer or probably the hacker everything about our code, about our servers and all those things. Not only this, we are even telling which folders like this Tomcat 7 web apps folder we are using, the exam results, some admin and some other things also we are showing you. So all these things are completely wrong here. Now you will say that okay, how the Scale Up India became admin, because I obviously took this error message directly from the Google and hence it is admin there. But still the point is that this thing is wrong. We should never throw the exception directly. Instead, we should show some user-friendly exception. So what do we need to do in the Java is, first of all, if any exception occurs, we need to handle it. And whenever we are handling it, then instead of showing directly the whole thing as it is, because UI doesn't know what needs to be done with this. So to UI also, it is the duty of a backend to tell what is a simple and short message, or what can be done in order to resolve this particular exception. So let's see the same thing with the help of our Java code. So here we are in our Eclipse IDE, and let's go to our demo 0. Now again, this demo 0 I have created with JDK 17. You can even go for any less version also, but this is the latest stable version, and hence I have some code ready with me. So here basically I'm just going to tell you the story which we are going to follow in all other demos. So first of all, let's go to this package service, and here you see that I'm having something like calculator service with me. So this is just an interface containing a method divide, and here I'm taking an integer array. So these 3 dots not represent the array as such, and instead it represents the var x. This means that there can be 0 integers, 1 integer, 2, or any number of integers. So the array will be created at the runtime. You don't need to pass the array as such, and instead you can just pass the integers comma separated. So I hope you must have learnt about var x. If not, then also it's simple and not a big concept. Now let's go to the implementation for this. So here you see that in the implementation what I have done is that initially I'm just saying quotient is 0. Then I'm assuming that whatever the number I'm getting on index 0. So I'm assuming here that okay, we will be getting 2 numbers basically, since we are dividing. On index 0 we will be getting some numerator, and on index 1 we will be getting some kind of denominator. And later on when I will be getting both of the values, so I will be just dividing them and telling the user that okay, what is the quotient of array 0 and array 1. So it's a simple code. Now here the issue may happen when you don't provide at least 2 numbers, or maybe some other kind of issue can occur, which we are going to see in some time. Now let's go here in a demo class. So again, here what we are doing, we are just creating an object of calculator service IMPL here, and then this is our first scenario. So with this variable we are going to call the divide method, and we are passing 2 numbers, 10, 2. Now obviously I'm not going to ask you this answer because it's very simple, it's 5. And in the second scenario we are saying 10, 0. Now what do you think what is going to happen? Will Java be able to divide 10 by 0? Now as per maths, the answer is no, because math will give you something like infinity. But will Java give you something like infinity? So let's see here. So I'll just click here and run the code, and here we see something like this. So it says that in scenario 1 the quotient of 10 and 2 is 5. Because I passed the 2 numbers, those numbers went here. On array index 0 we were having 10, on index 1 we were having 2, and the quotient became 5, and this line got printed, quotient of 10 and 2 is 5. But then what happened with this second scenario when we passed denominator as 0? So here it tried to divide 10 by 0, and instead of printing this line it threw this kind of exception. So here we say that this is exception stack trace. So this is an exception stack trace. Why I am calling it a stack trace? Because you see all these lines are one above the another. And what is the best way to read this kind of stack trace is always from the bottom line. So first of all we see that something have occurred in this particular package com.scaleupindia, class name is demo and the method name is main, and something happened on line number 16. So if you click, it will highlight here, because obviously from here we call that particular method. Then it went to this particular package com.scaleupindia.service IMPL in the class calculator service IMPL in the method divide, and then something happened on line number 13 where we were actually trying to divide. And then what happened was it threw something like arithmetic exception. So here we will say that this just represents your thread main. So more about this you can read in a or learn in a multi-threading video, and there we have explained this particular thing in detail, that what is thread, why do we call it as thread main and not method main. So that video you can watch. I'll give you the link on the top in the form of an I button. Now this throws me the exception as arithmetic exception. Now I didn't create this exception. Java is already having this kind of exception with it in the package java.lang. If you click on this, it is not showing here, but what we can do is we will just let me do something like this, arithmetic exception, and let me do again something like this, and let me say here something new, arithmetic exception, and this. So I have just mentioned it, and now what I'll do is I'll just click here and I'll say open declaration. So this will open me the class arithmetic exception for me, and this class just simply looks something like this. And as you can see, this is the child of runtime exception. So let's go there. So again, this is a very simple class, nothing much, and then it is the child of exception. So there is some kind of hierarchy. So we will go to exception, and this is further the child of throwable with us. So this is there. So the throwable. So all these classes are there, but as of now our major concern is not to learn about all these classes, but to understand that here the exception has been thrown by Java itself. So let me just remove this part also from here. So this is the exception, and what is this? This is the message, divide by 0, and this is your whole stack trace. Now here this exception occurred, but after this what needs to be done? So we are not telling anything to the user, and as a common user I won't know what to do here. Maybe I'm not able to read this particular stack trace. Here the code is simple, so the stack is of 3 lines only. But with the bigger codes, you have seen in our PPT also that when it is some file not found of exception or some other exception, then stack can be of multiple lines also. It can be 20, 30 or whatever it is, depending upon the code. So we should never show the stack trace to the user or the default message to the user, and instead of it we should handle the exception and then show some better exception to the user or some user friendly message where we are telling the user that what he or she can do, or maybe in simple terms we can just tell what went wrong so that they can analyze on their own that what is the solution of it. So now let's quickly close all these files and this particular package also. Let me just close them, and let me just clear the console also. Now let's see what is exception handling. First of all, before understanding what is exception handling, let's again talk about what is an exception. So as per the statement, it says an exception is an unexpected or abnormal event that occurred during the execution of the program. Now it can be some runtime exception also. Like in our case, it happened we were trying to divide by 0. Earlier there were no error or the exception in our code, but later on when we executed the code, we found there is some kind of exception. So hence we call it as runtime exception, because we were not aware of it when we created the code. It can be a system crash also. Maybe you are dealing with some kind of files, you are dealing with some kind of database, the connection between your code and the database or the connection between your code and the file broke, the system got crashed, or maybe wherever the code was available, that whole system got crashed. So that is also an exception. And sometimes it is just due to the invalid input, where you were expecting some kind of, let's say, integer, but user entered some kind of string. Hence we call it as an invalid input, and again this is an exception. So what needs to be done in this scenario? So the answer is we need to do exception handling. So let's see what it is. So exception handling is a programming technique that enables software developers to anticipate and handle errors or exception situations that may occur while a program is running. So when we say exception handling, we don't mean to say that okay, we are going to resolve the exception. Now obviously we can't do anything when the user wants to divide 10 by 0. We can't just give some particular quotient in those conditions because that is not allowed mathematically. But instead of giving the stack trace to the user, what we can do is we can give some user friendly message, a simple short message that okay, you cannot divide by 0. then obviously the user is going to change the numbers, and then maybe he or she is going to get some kind of output. Let's see what can be done with our previous examples here. So how to make this particular thing right? So you saw that we were asking the user to enter the username and password, and then we were asking the user to log in. And what happened when the username is not there? So instead of showing the exception stack trace or throwing the null pointer exception, we can simply throw a simple message from the backend that username is invalid, a simple message, and then the UI can read that message, enhance it, and can tell that username is invalid, try with a valid username. So the message is as simple as possible. With the second example, it can be like this. So here we were asking the user to double click on the file to open, but let's say that we were able to list the files because the names were available with us, but we are not able to show the file to the user. So again, instead of throwing the exception as it is, we can simply tell that file is not found, and then it is up to the UI that what kind of message they want to show. Maybe they can simply say that file is not found, or maybe they can say that we cannot access the file now and please try again later. So any of the messages is fine depending on the business needs, but this is the right way to handle the exception. Now let's talk about exception hierarchy, something which we just now saw, and then we will again go to the code, and then we will see how to handle those exceptions, and then more details of exception handling. So you just now saw that on the top we were having the throwable class. So yes, that class is there, which we call as throwable, and this is the parent of all the exceptions in Java. And directly we never deal with this. The reason is because there are two children of this class. The one is exception and the other one is error. Now you will see that I have highlighted the error in red color and exception in some golden color. The reason is, let's first talk about error. So error, we are going to say, is a completely abnormal kind of scenario where we are not telling the user to do something in order to resolve that particular error, because it may be that the user were trying to divide something, big numbers, or user was trying to, let's say, upload some kind of file, you didn't have the memory. So in those kind of cases, when you don't have the memory space, you can't tell the user to increase the memory space. Their user can't do anything. Or let's say there is some power failure. So again, you can't ask the user to do something. So those are completely abnormal situations where we can't expect user to handle them, and neither we can handle them. The only possible way is to enhance our infrastructure. Hence we call them as error, and obviously it is not possible to handle them, but maybe whenever it is occurring, next time we are going to resolve it. Maybe we are going to rebuild the code and we are going to redeploy this, and that way we can resolve the error. But in the terms of code, we can never handle or resolve the errors. Hence we are not going to talk about this in a particular video. So let's focus on the exception, something which is going to happen and we need to deal with that. So under exception, there we will be having two kinds of exceptions. One is a checked exception, other one is the unchecked exception. So checked exceptions are the ones which says that you as a developer always needs to handle them. They can occur at the compilation time also, and without handling them you can't proceed. So they simply says that you need to handle them. Now after handling, what you are doing, maybe you are just rethrowing it, maybe you are showing some user friendly message, that is up to you as a developer. On the other hand, there are some unchecked exceptions which can happen at the runtime, something like divide by zero, arithmetic exception, or null pointer exception. So here we don't expect the user to always handle them, because that's why we call them as runtime. You are not sure that what can happen in future after some time. So those kinds of exceptions are there. But still, if possible, we can have some user friendly messages for them also. So under the checked exception, these are one of the common exceptions we will be having, and all of them, as you can see, are the child classes of the exception class. So first of all, we will be having IO exception, which simply means input output exception. And then there is a further child of it which we call as file not found exception. So this file not found will happen explicitly when you are dealing with the files, and besides file, if you are dealing with anything else, let's say input from the user or something else, it can be an IO exception. Other option can be maybe you were looking for some particular class and the class is not found. So it can happen that you are working with a very big code, you are dependent on some external code also, and at that time you are not able to find a class. Hence we call it as class not found exception. The other one is SQL exception. This generally happens when you are working with the database, you have created some SQL query, but then there is some mistake in it, and hence the SQL exception can occur. And besides this also there are many more checked exception. Obviously it is not possible to remember all those exceptions, and neither I remember all those exceptions, but you can always learn them whenever they are going to occur. So the major point is not to remember their names, but the point is to handle those exceptions when they are going to occur. And since they are checked exception, so it is always our duty to handle them. Now the other ones are unchecked exception. So you see that under exception, the first child is the runtime exception. Just a few minutes ago you saw that runtime exception is a class in itself, and then further there are child classes of this runtime exception, which are arithmetic exception, which occurred just now. Then it can be a null pointer exception. When you were trying to access something, it is not found. Maybe you are working with the arrays and you went beyond the particular index, so it will say array index out of bound exception. Or maybe you were trying to convert some string to some kind of integer, and then it is not possible, so it will say class cast exception or something. And then again I'm using the term etc here because there can be many more runtime exceptions. Again, it is not possible for any one of us to remember all of them, but at least for the basic and the common ones we should remember, and we should know how to handle them. So unchecked are the ones which are not mandatory to handle, but still it is a good practice to handle them also. I mean, we should not show those big kind of stack trays to the UI or to our user. So here our goal will be to learn about both the checked and the unchecked exceptions, how to handle them, what are the practices which we need to follow while working with the checked exceptions, what are the things which we need to do while working with the unchecked exceptions, and we are also going to learn how we can create our own custom exception. So let's see the implementation. So we are back here in our IDE, and let's start with our demo 1. So remember that what we discussed in demo 0, and with that let's get started here. So again I'll just quickly show you this calculator service in case you have missed or you are directly watching the video from this part. So this is the calculator service which is having a divide method, and it is taking an integer as var x, which means you can pass any number of integers comma separated, and Java is going to create the array for you. Then this is my service sample. So I'm having multiple implementations with me so that I'm not going to change the whole code again and again. And what I will be doing is that I will deploy, I'm going to push all the code to the GitHub so that from there you can download easily, and then you can also execute them in the same order. So this is my calculator service IMPL, and here again you see I haven't added anything extra. It is exactly the same thing. Initially I'm saying quotient equals to 0. On index 0 I'm assuming numerator. On index 1 I'm assuming denominator, and dividing them, and I'm printing the quotient. And this contains my demo class where I'm having scenario 1 where I will be dividing 10 by 2, and in the scenario 2 I will be dividing 10 by 0. And as you know, if I execute this, for the first one I will be getting some output as 5. For the second one I will be getting this particular kind of stack trace. So here I've already explained you. If you still have any doubt in this, so you can go back in the video and you can see what I explained in demo 0. So now let's see that how we can handle this thing. So for this what we will do is we will go to our calculator service sample. Now how I decided that I need to go, because as per this stack trace only. So let's again just revise quickly. So what happened here? We started the code from the main method you need to act as the JDK or JVM here explicitly. So acting as the JVM, we are going to start with the main method. So in the main method, in line number 16, something happened. From line number 16, JVM called the divide method of calculator service IMPL class. And then something happened in this particular line. So this is the route where the exception can occur. So what we will do is that we are going to surround this line with the try block. So this is the syntax for it. We will just say try and start the braces, and after this statement we are going to close this. If you wish, you can even keep this statement also in your try block, and there is no harm in this, and you can put it like this. So there can be any number of lines in your try block, but at least it should be having that part of code which is throwing you the exception. Now if I just save it, so you see it is giving me some kind of exception, and this is basically the compilation error. Because the reason is you can't have the try block alone. After every try block, either you should have a catch block, or as it says, you should be having the finally block. Now we are going to discuss about the finally block in our later demos, but let's go with the catch block now. So I'll just give some space and I will say catch. Now which kind of exception should I catch here? Obviously the one which is happening, and since I have already executed it, so I know that arithmetic exception can occur. So I'll just copy the name from here, I'll keep it here. So this is the one. Now after this, when I'm handling this exception, I need to again handle it as a variable. It is the same way that whenever in your method you are going to pass something, first you need to give the data type and then you need to provide some argument. So with that you can point to that particular value. So same here, we are going to point to the exception with the name as exception. You can even go for any simpler name like E or EX or whatever you wish. I'm just going with the name as exception here. And after this, what we will do is we'll again go for the catch block. So this is the mandatory, and now you see the error has gone away. If I just say Ctrl Shift F, so I have formatted it, and you can see this is looking simple. So in my try block, I have the business logic. Now there I'm having some lines which can cause me the exception. And after that I'm having a catch block where I'm handling the exception. How did I came to know that only this exception is going to occur? Because I have executed it for the first time. Hence I know. And in this exception I'm going to handle it. But after handling, what I will be doing? So what if I just run this as it is without doing anything there? So if I run and let's see what happens. So you see that in scenario 1 it is saying quotient of 10 and 2 is 5, but in scenario 2 nothing happened. So here this means that we were able to handle the exception, we were able to catch the exception, but there is no meaning of catching the exception until unless you tell the user what happened there. So what we will do is, there are multiple ways to handle it, and first of all let's see that as a developer what we can do. So as a developer, my simplest approach will be that I'll just say here exception dot print stack trace. So I'll say exception dot print stack trace. Now what this is going to do for me, what kind of message it is going to show, let's execute and see. So when I execute this, you'll see that it is still showing the same kind of output which it was showing you earlier when we were not handling the exception. And then you will tell me that okay, then what is the benefit of having the try and catch block when you are still having the exception? So the point is that there is a difference. Earlier the stack trace was coming on its own because we were not handling the exception. This time we are handling the exception and then we are printing the stack trace. So this is always helpful when you are developing the code, because at that point of time maybe you are thinking some other ways also to resolve this kind of exception, and hence it's always better to print the stack trace so that you can understand in a better way that okay, what do I want to show here. So this is going to be your simplest way of handling the exception, but again this is not a user friendly way, because again to the user you are just showing the stack trace here, which is not good. This is only helpful when we are working as a developer and the code is not yet released. Yeah. So I hope this one is clear. Now let's move on with our second service IMPL. So what I'll do here is I'll just replace it by service IMPL 1, and let me just import this particular thing by saying Ctrl-Shift-O. So I have imported it, and let me go here to our service IMPL 1. So here you see I'm using the previous code. So what I will keep on doing is I will keep on changing the previous code so that you don't feel that everything is already available there. So you just saw that we were doing with the help of this print stack trace, and I told you that this is only helpful for the developer, not for the user. So here what can be done? So instead of printing the stack trace, what we can do is we can just say sysout, and within the sysout we can say exception as it is. So whatever the exception occurred, we are printing the exception only. This is also possible. Let's see what happens now when we are executing this, and how I'm changing. I'm having the same interface, but all these are the different implementations. So I'll just keep on running, and same way you can execute after downloading the GitHub demos. Now you see it is going to give me this kind of output. So it is as compared better than the previous one, because as a developer you identified that okay, this is the stack trace, and then you are now handling it in this way just by printing the exception. So when you print this exception object, then what do we get here? We get two things. One is the exception name along with the package name, and second is the exception message. But is it still readable for the user? The answer is no, but it is again helpful during the coding. Let's say you don't want the whole stack trace, you just want to see which exception occurred, so you can just check out like this. So this is helpful. Now let's move on with our service IMPL 2 and see the third way of handling this. So again we are saying service IMPL 2 here, and let's import it by saying Ctrl-Shift-O. So if I open this, so this time what I'll do is instead of printing the exception, I'll just say a dot, and here you can again see there are multiple methods. So out of this, my method which I will be using is I'll just say get message. So maybe I'm not interested to know the name of the exception, because I have already handled it. What I will do by knowing the name again, so maybe I just want to print the message, so I can just say get message. And now when I execute this, I will be just getting the default message divide by 0, slash by 0. Now if you are running the same code with an older JDK, then you can even see that sometimes earlier it used to show divide word as it is instead of the symbol divide, but later on they started using the symbol instead of the word. So this is the way. So again it is helpful for the coder, but not for the user. For the user we still want a little bit more better message. So hence let's go for our service IMPL 3 this time, and let me again do here Ctrl-Shift-O. So I have done, and let's go there. So here instead of saying exception.getMessage, what I will be doing is I'll give some random message here, something a custom message. So I'll say cannot divide, so it should be divide, D-I-V-I-D-E. So I'll say cannot divide, and then I'll say what was the numerator. Maybe I want to tell that also to the user, which numerator did they used. So I'll say array 0, and then I'll say by what. So if I wish, I can hard code it by 0, because in that case only this kind of exception is going to occur. Otherwise I can still make usage of those arrays, since that is available with me, and I can say something like this: cannot divide array 0 by array 1. Now this you see is a more better user friendly message here. And now when I run the code, I will be getting something like this: cannot divide 10 by 0. So earlier I was getting question of 10 and 2 is 5, and for this I'm getting cannot divide by 0. So this is a better friendly user message, and hence user will come to know that okay, they should not divide it by 0 and they should divide it by some other number. Obviously, if you wish, you can even say cannot divide any number by 0, or you can say that division by 0 is not possible. But my main point is that here you can customize your message whatever the way you want. If you wish, you can reuse some of the by default message from this exception variable, or if you wish, you can give it completely customized. It is up to you. But all these are the ways to handle the exception in your catch block. So this we have seen. Now let's proceed with the next demo. So just now we saw that how we were handling the exception. So in the next demo also, let's get started. So first of all, this is the same demo class. This is the same service. So let me just close it. And this is my service IMPL. You can see again it is the same only. And again if I run, so it will show me same kind of output. So you will say that okay, this we have seen. Then what is the purpose of showing the same thing again? So what do you think? Is there any chance that any other kind of exception can occur here? The answer is yes. Still, there are chances that some other kind of exception can also occur. Let's say that while coding, by mistake, user passed on 2 instead of 0. So user just passed 2. Or another option is that user just passed 1 only. So let's say this. But here, since you are taking the var x, so user didn't pass the 2 numbers and user just passed a single number. Now what will happen? What is available at my index 1? The answer is nothing. So currently the size of array is 1 only, and only a single number exists at index 0. There is nothing at index number 1. So in this case, what will happen? Is it still going to handle the exception? The answer is no, because we were handling the arithmetic exception. So this is not that you are trying to divide by 0. It is some other issue. So let's see what happens now. So if I execute, it will give me some output like this. It says array index out of bounds exception. Index 1 out of bounds for length 1. Which means that this time some other runtime exception occurred. So if you remember, when I shown you the exception hierarchy, arithmetic exception was also a runtime exception, unchecked one. And this array index out of bounds is also a runtime exception and unchecked one. They can happen at the runtime. You may not need to handle, but it's always a better practice to handle. So now what can be done? So obviously you will say there is nothing wrong. What we are going to do is we will copy this and we will just replace it here. And then it will look something like this. And in the message, instead of saying cannot divide this by 0, what we can do is we can just say something like index used is out of bounds. Well, we can just say something like this. Index used is out of bounds. Or we can even give a better message. We can say minimum 2 arguments are needed. So we can say minimum 2 arguments are needed here. So something like this also can be said, so that user start passing 2 arguments, and now this is handled, as you can see. So this is possible. But now what about if the user passes the 2 arguments but user passes it as 0? Then what? Is it still handled? The answer is no. This time it is not handled, because now you are just handling the array index out of bound exception. So what can be done in these kind of scenarios? So for this, let's move on to service IMPL 1. So I'll just replace it by service IMPL 1, Control Shift O here. So in the service IMPL 1, let me just close this. What we can do is that instead of a single catch block, we can have multiple catch blocks also. And let me change this message. And let me just copy paste this particular one. Let me make it a little better. Minimum 2 arguments are needed. So let's copy this, let's go here and let's say something like this. So this we have given up here, and let's see that how we can still handle the arithmetic exception. So I'll just say a catch block after this. So yes, this is possible. You can even have one more catch block here. So you just need to give some words, and this can be the same or it can be different also, because it's a separate block. So the scope is within the block. And here what we can do is we can just say sys out once, and here we can say cannot divide, and then we can say this, and then we can say array 0, and then we can say some by, and then it is possible to say 1. So this thing is possible here, guys. So now we don't need service sample 1, and here what we can do is if I give 0, so that will be handled. But okay, there is some mistake. It says minimum 2 arguments are needed again and again. Something went wrong in my coding. Okay, here I was actually earlier thinking of some other way. So let me just say here 1 instead of 2. So let me just execute. So we can say quotient of 2 and 10 and 2 is 5 for the first one. For the second one, it says me cannot divide 10 by 0. So arithmetic exception is handled. And what if I don't pass on the numbers? Then what? In that particular case, it will tell me minimum 2 arguments are needed. So that is also fine. Both are possible here. So how does it actually works? So what the solution happens is that first of all your code goes here. Then let's assume that it is able to find both of them. So obviously it is not going to be array index out of bound. So it won't be caught here. And you have passed the denominator as 2. So this also won't be executed. Everything went well, and this line will be printed if everything is fine. Now let's say that you have passed 2 arguments, but the second one is 0. So then it will first come here. It will say that okay, I'm an arithmetic exception, but this says I'm an array index exception. So these are not going to match. Then it comes here. The exception says I'm arithmetic exception. It also says I'm going to handle you. So it handles. Now the third scenario, when you don't pass on the second number. So it says I'm array index exception. It says yes, I'm ready to handle you. And then this is again possible. So that means that you can have your exceptions in any order. So the order of your exception doesn't matter. If you wish, you can just say Control X here, and you can say Control V. So this is also going to work in the same way. This is the same behavior like it works in the switch case. So whenever you write a switch, you can write the cases in any order. So whatever the cases matches first, that is going to appear in your output. Now, what if that some other kind of exception occurs here? Now, as of now, I don't have any better example, but imagine that some exception has occurred. Then what we are going to do here? So in that case, it is going to become difficult, because let's say even we have identified the name of the exception, but then how many kind of catch blocks we are going to write? Are we going to write 3 catch blocks? Then maybe some 4th can occur, some 5th can occur. It can be any number of runtime exceptions can occur. So what is the solution? The solution is that at the end, if we wish, we can just say exception here. So we'll say exception, and the variable name is exception, and something like this. So we can see this. Now why this is going to work? Because the exception is the parent of all the checked and the unchecked exception. So first of all, it will try to go here. If it is arithmetic, it will be caught. If it is array index, it will be caught here. And if it is any third kind of exception, it can come here. Now you may say that okay, then how will I come to know which kind of exception has occurred? So we can give some custom message also. We can say something went wrong, and then here we can maybe make usage of something like this. Maybe we can just print the exception as it is, or if you wish, we may just print the message also. Any of the options are fine. Or if you just wish, you can just say something went wrong. Now since this is going to be a common one, so here you cannot pass some better message. The best option is just of saying something went wrong, and then maybe if you wish you can just say like this, what went wrong, the exception itself, the message from that exception. So this way it can be used in this particular one. But here one thing we always needs to remember. So just now I said that you can write these catch blocks in any order. It doesn't matter whether you say arithmetic or array index, so it can be any. But exception is the parent of first two. So you should never write like this, because you can never even write like this. So here if you see, what I have done is I'm writing the exception first. Now forget about that this compilation error is coming, and just think what is happening here. So arithmetic exception occurred, it came here, and since it is the child of exception, so it is caught. So then there is no need of this one. Array index out of bound exception occurred, it came here, it got caught, there is no need of this also. So hence these two catch blocks are just a useless here. And if I hover over this, it says unreachable catch block, because code will never come to any of these catch blocks because the parent is already handling them. Hence, if you wish to have a specific message for some exceptions, then you should always write them first. The parent exception should always come at the end as the last option. Or if you wish that no, I just want a common message only, then simply go by the exception. Then you don't need specifically arithmetic exception or array index out of bound exception. That is fine there. Now let's go for the last one. So here we go with our service IMPL2. So again you see that here we are having multiple catch blocks, and here let's say that for the arithmetic exception and the array index out of bound exception, I want a same kind of message. Maybe I want something like this, or let's say that I want to say it to be like this, and I will call it like either. So let me make E capital. So I'll say either arithmetic or array index. I don't want to give something explicit, but I just want to call it like any of these things have occurred, something like this. And same I'm going to repeat here, something like this. So if it is an arithmetic, I will say either it is arithmetic or array index exception. If it is array index, then also I will give the same message. Now I'll go to this demo, and there I will call it as 2, and I'll say Control Shift O. Let me just execute. So you will see, okay, for the first one, let me make it correct as 1, and this will now look better. So here you will see that for the first one it is working fine, because now I have made that particular index as 1. For the second one it gives me this. Now you are not sure whether it is handled here or handled here, because you are not worried about that. You only just said that I want a common message, and if there is any other third kind of exception, then I want a specific message. So this can be done. Now obviously this is fine, but here the issue is that you are repeating the code. Since the body of both of these catch blocks is same, you may not need to write it like this. What you can do is you can handle multiple exceptions in a single catch block. Yes, you heard it right. Multiple catch blocks in a single catch block. Now let's see how it can be done. So what we will do is we will copy this, and after this we are saying either it is arithmetic or array index. So we'll give a space and we'll use the pipe symbol of OR. We'll use bitwise OR here, and we'll say arithmetic index out of bound exception. And now we don't need this because we are already handling it on top. So this is possible, that you can have multiple exceptions separated by the OR symbol in a single catch block. So if it is any one of them, it will be handled. If it is some other third exception, it won't be handled, and it can be handled separately. So let's just execute and see how it is going to work. So It is just going to work in the same way, nothing wrong. Now, what if, can we even write this exception here? Let's see. So let me just write it like this, exception, and give some space. Now you see, it is not giving me some error in the next catch block. Instead, it is giving me error in the first catch block only. Because here what I'm saying, here I'm saying if it is arithmetic or array index or exception, then print this line. So it is fine. But the problem here is arithmetic is also a child of exception. Array index is also a child of exception. So there is no meaning of saying or, because even if you won't write these two, then also obviously this first only is going to be printed. Hence, you should not write this exception in your multi-catch block. So we can call it as a multi-catch block. So you should not write exception here, neither at end nor in the starting. So this is not possible here, guys, and only this. And here also the same thing to remember, this exception should always come at the end, not on the top. So this was the theory for this particular one. I hope you found it clear. So let's close them and proceed with our next demo, which is our demo number 3 here. So let's go and let's see the things here, what is waiting for us. So calculator service class is looking the same only. Now let's go to our service IMPL. So this service IMPL is also almost looking the same. So here we have a multi-catch block, and this is the exception, this is fine, and this is our demo, guys. So all these are the available. Now, till now what we have done is that we were handling the exception where it occurred. But let's say there are multiple classes. There is some calculator service IMPL, there is some calculator service IMPL 2, there is some other class, and this way you are having around 10 to 20 classes. Now you are tired of handling the exceptions separately in all the classes. Then what can be done? So the solution which can be done is that since all the classes are being called by this main method only, so instead of handling those exceptions separately in those child classes, or we can say other classes, what we can do is we can remove the code from there. So let's remove the try block and let's remove this catch block also. So we'll remove everything from there and we can copy and paste the things here in this main method itself. So first of all, let's see where the exception is going to occur now. So exception is going to occur in these lines only of divide. So what we can do is these divide lines we can put in the try block. It is up to you which all lines you want to keep in your try block. So here I'm just keeping all these lines and I'll just paste the logic which I copied earlier. So let me do this and let's say Ctrl Shift F. So now this looks fine. So here this time I'm not handling the exceptions in some other class. Instead I'm handling the exception here itself, and if I execute, it will give you the same kind of output. Since it is happening here, so it is showing me this kind of exception. If you wish, we can even remove this, because here maybe we don't want some specific message for arithmetic or index, and maybe we just want to go for a single message for all the kind of exceptions. Maybe that's the reason we have kept it in the main method. So let's execute and you can see something like this occurred. Something went wrong, and what was the issue? Divide by 0. So obviously this is not a user-friendly message, but here our goal is just to learn that how we can handle all the exceptions in the main method itself. So this is simple also. Now you don't need to write the try-catch logic in multiple classes, and single class can do the job. So this was there. Now let's proceed with our next example. So in the next example, what we are going to see is that how we can throw the exception on our own. So till now we saw that exception was coming and then we were handling that particular exception. But what if we want to throw our own exception? Then what can be done? So let me just execute it quickly first. and on executing you see something like this. Now we know that whenever this array 1, the index 1 is 0, this kind of message is going to appear. So my plan is to check here only, first of all, that if array of 1 equals to 0, then I want to throw some kind of exception on my own. Now it can be any exception. Since as of now we are not dividing, so I don't want to throw the arithmetic divide exception. I just want to throw some other exception. Maybe I wish to throw null pointer exception. So what I'll say is, I'll say null. So I'll just say null and I'll call it like this, null pointer exception. Now remember that all these exceptions are the class. Now whenever you want to create an object, so how do you create? So usually you say here new, and then you say something like this, and this is the way you are going to create the object. Let's see, will this throw the exception for me? So what I'm doing is, I'm just checking for index 1. If it is 0, I'm saying null pointer exception has been created. So let's see if this works. So we'll come here and we'll click. So nothing happened. It is still that same old message is only coming. If you are not clear which exception came here, so let's print it like this, exception. So you see that still arithmetic exception is coming, because what you are doing is you are just creating an object of null pointer exception. But that was not the scenario. The scenario was to throw that particular exception. So we need to use a new keyword here, which we call as throw. So here we will say throw new null pointer exception. And by this way, we can throw an exception on our own. Now this null pointer exception was already there in Java, but we are throwing it whenever we wish. So what are the steps? You need to use the throw keyword, and then you just need to use the same way like how you create the object for any class. So now if you execute this, you will see it is a null pointer exception. And why it is looking like this? Why only the exception name? Why there is no message? Because you haven't passed on any message in the brackets. If you wish, you can pass on the message also. So let's see how to pass the message. So for this, we'll come here and we'll just pass on the message. So here, let's say we wish to pass on the same message which we were handling earlier. So we'll say cannot, or let not say cannot divide by 0. Instead we can say that, or let's say that cannot divide by 0 only. Cannot divide, and then let's see which number they wish to divide. So they wish to divide this array 0, and then let's see by what. So here, where is that plus symbol? It's here. So we will say by, and then here we will say array of 1. I missed the plus symbol here, guys. So this is the one. And now let's execute, but with the service impl2. So if I say Control Shift O, why didn't it work? Okay, it is service impl1. These are the silly mistakes which anyone can do. So if I execute, this time it says something went wrong because it is hard coded here. Then it gives me the exception name. It's the null pointer exception, and then this is my message, cannot divide by 0. So what we learned here is that yes, we can throw any exception on our own, and we can even provide the message also. How to provide? Just here. So any of these things are fine. Just one thing which you need to remember is that you can only pass a string here. You cannot pass an object as it is here, or a number or something else here. Only a string value is allowed whenever you are passing the messages. Now let's move on with our next demo, which is demo number 5 here. So let's quickly see what all things we have. So first of all, the calculator service looking as always. Then we have this calculator service impl without any message, that's fine. And then we have this demo. So let's quickly execute. So these errors are happening because of there is something in service impl 1 and 2. So as of now we'll proceed because I want service impl. So it says that okay, this message is null here. Why? Because I'm just printing the message and that is null. So instead of message, let me print the exception itself and then let's see what happens. So now it says it's a null pointer exception. So you see we just now saw that. Okay, that is fine. Now instead of null pointer exception, this time I wish to throw some other kind of exception. And that exception which I want to throw is IO exception. So I'll say it like this, IO exception, and I'll say Control Shift O. So this exception exists, java.io exception. When I was showing you the exception hierarchy also, you found yes, it is there. But even after saying throw of new, it is giving me some kind of compilation error. Now why is it so? The reason why this is giving me the compilation error is, if you remember that exception hierarchy, this is a checked exception. So till now we have worked with the arithmetic, we have worked with the array index out of bound exception, we have worked with the null pointer exception also, and all those were the unchecked exceptions. Which means that if you wish, you can handle them. If you don't wish, you don't handle them. They will directly throw the error, but Java won't tell you anything. Now this is a checked exception, which means Java wants us to handle the exception. So yes, that is fine. Java wants us to handle, but we don't want to handle it here. Instead, we want to handle in the parent class, and that we are doing. So we are handling by saying exception. Exception is the parent of all. Then why there is a problem? The problem is that you know you are handling the exception in the caller method, but as of now Java doesn't know. So here you need to tell Java that this method can do two things. Either everything can go fine, it will print this particular statement, it will return void, or it can throw some kind of unchecked exception. For that you obviously no need to tell this because those are runtime, or you need to say that yes, this can throw an IO exception. So for this, only this is not going to work. You also need to say throws, and there you need to say what it can do. So we are saying it can throw IO exception. Let's say Control Shift F, Control Shift O, Control Shift F. This I printed by mistake. So yeah, this is fine. IO exception. Still it is not working. So why so? The reason is because here we are overriding this method. So the method is coming from the calculator service. Now in the calculator service, that method is not throwing, because in your implementation you have mentioned that either it can return void or it can be any checked exception like IO exception. But in the parent also you need to say that yes, it can return you void or it can throw you the IO exception. So here also we will say throws IO exception, something like this, Control Shift O, Control Shift O, Control Shift F. So this will work. So always remember that whenever you are overriding the method, so in the child method or in the overridden method, you cannot throw any new checked exception which was not available in the parent. So here in the parent method itself, we are saying it can throw IO exception. Hence in the child also you can say something like this. If you wish, you can even throw some other exception also, that is fine. Now let's see how this is handled. So now if I execute, you see it is printing me the same thing. The only difference is, since it is a checked exception, you need to write here also throws. Since it is an overridden method, so in the parent also you need to mention which kind of exception is being thrown here. So this is fine. Now can we give some message also here? The answer is yes. If you wish, you can give some message here also like this. We can say cannot divide, and then we can say what? So we will say array of 0, and then we can say this plus symbol, there we can say this by, and then there we can say array of 1. So again here also we can give the message, and if I execute it with service impl1, so let's say Control Shift O, and then let me run this. So this will also work. So this is possible. So here we saw how to work with the checked exception. The only new thing is the throws. And also remember that you cannot replace or swap these words. So here it is always throw and here it is throws. Now this can be multiple also. So let's say that you say, what if I want to throw the SQL exception also? So it is possible, and you just need to say SQL and then you need to say exception here. So you can write it like this, but you will say again it is not working. The reason is, in the child you cannot throw any new checked exception. So if you are writing here, you need to mention it in the parent also, that yes, it can throw this SQL exception also. So Control Shift O and Control Shift F. Here also let's say Control Shift O, and this is going to work fine for us. If you are tired of providing multiple, then you can simply say throws exception. Just remember, in the parent also you need to say throws exception. So this is fine. Now let's see, can we throw a normal unchecked exception from this method? So what we will do is, we will again make it null exception. So let's call it as null pointer exception again here. So yeah, this is possible. So here we are saying throws IO exception, but this doesn't mean it cannot throw any unchecked exception. It can throw an unchecked exception, and this thing is still possible. But why is it saying me IO exception here? Maybe somewhere I have made a mistake, or why? So let's see. So here it says something went wrong, and the reason why it is saying IO exception is because I was executing the previous demo. Let me say demo 2 here, service IMPL 2 here. That's the common mistake which I'll keep on repeating again and again here. So you see, now it is saying null pointer exception. So it can be anything. The only thing which you need to remember here is that for the checked exceptions, you need to mention here explicitly. If you wish, you can mention multiple also, but the parent should also return, the parent method. And if you are tired of providing multiple exceptions, then you can simply say the throws exception, which is parent of all the exceptions. So that is fine. For the unchecked exceptions, you never need to say anything like this. So this way we understood how to work with the checked as well as the unchecked exceptions. Now let's move ahead with our next demo and see what is waiting for us. So here we are having the interface with us, that is throws IO exception, which we just now saw. Then this is the demo where we are handling the exception. We are saying something went wrong, and here we can just say exception because we want to know which kind of exception also came. Then this is my service IMPL. So this is again same throws IO exception. The only difference this time is that here also you have written a catch block. So first of all, is this allowed? The answer is yes. So many times whenever you are coding, this can occur that first of all you want to handle the exception, and then maybe you want to rethrow the same, which is really, or you may want to rethrow some other kind of exception because of some XYZ reasons. So that is possible here. But let's see what it is going to behave when we run. So let's me just do this and let's go here. So here we were trying to divide 10 by 0, then it came here. So from here, first of all, it threw the IO exception. So here it says exception handled in. I'm printing the class. So the class got printed with the package name, and I'm saying this exception occurred here. And hence again I'm throwing the exception. So that is fine. And then I'm handling the exception here. So this is possible. Yeah, if you wish, you can maybe first of all you can handle the IO exception and then you can throw some other kind of exception. So one of the other things which we also do is that whatever the checked exception is, we handle it and we convert it to, let's say, some unchecked exception, and then we are throwing. Or let's say we are doing the reverse. We are handling some unchecked exception, we are converting it to the checked exception, and then we are throwing. So all the ways is possible. But what I extra want is that I want some statement here. So I want a new statement, which is, let's say, this one here, sys out, and I'll say it as print always. just something like this, print always. Yeah. So there is no particular statement, but I just want to print it always. Now just think once, is there any chance that this statement is going to be printed always? The answer is no. This is not going to be printed always. The only possibility of printing this is that no exception occurs, the control comes here, and then this gets printed. If any exception will occur, it will directly go to the catch block. From the catch block, you are throwing out of the method, and output will look like this. For scenario 1, it will be printed, but for scenario 2, it is not going to be printed. Then what can be done? Shall we write it here? Something like this. But that is also not possible because you are throwing from here only. So how can you write here? Even Java is stopping you by doing this, by saying it is an unreachable code. Then what can be done? So since we are throwing exception here, what if we put the statement here? Now Java is not throwing any exception, and I hope that I will get this particular statement printed always. What do you think? So let's execute. So this time you see, for scenario 1 it is not printing, but for scenario 2 it is printing. The reason is, for scenario 1 everything went well, so this line got printed and it never came to your catch block. Hence there was no chance that print always can be printed. So again, this is also not a right place to print this. Then what? Can we put it here? Let's see. So now I'm just putting at the end. So let's see the chances. So this time for scenario 1 it is printing, because first of all this line got printed, it didn't came to the catch block, and this was the last line of method, so it got printed. For scenario 2 it came here, or first of all it just came here, some exception occurred, and then it went here in exception handling, and then it threw the exception. So that means that currently as of now there is no chance to print the statement always. I tried printing it in the try block also, catch block also, here also, but it didn't work. Either it is working in the success scenario or it is working in the failure scenario. You may say then print it on the top in the initial only whenever the control is coming to this method, but I wanted to print it only at the end when the method is about to over, irrespective there is any exception or no. I just want to print it at the end. So what can be done? So for this, the solution is we can put this in the finally block, guys. So we can say after the catch block, a finally block like this, and within the finally block we can print here. So you remember earlier it was saying that after try block you can have a finally block. So that is the same one. So let me just say Ctrl+Shift+F so that it gets formatted, and now let's execute and see how it behaves. So when the code is working fine, control came here, then it didn't went to the catch block, it went to your finally block, this statement got printed. When there was some exception in this particular statement, then it went to your catch block, this line got printed, but before throwing the exception, it checked, is there any final block? If yes, what is the content? Hence the line got printed before coming out of this particular method. So hence we say this is the job of a final block, to execute a part of code always, irrespective there is any success or failure. What you can also do is that you can have the final block directly without a catch block. So even this thing is fine. And if I execute this, it will behave like this, print always. So next time the exception occurred, although we are not catching, but the control will for sure come here, and then only it is going to move out. So that is the case in this one. Now, what is the purpose of this final block? Like we understood that, okay, if we want to print a particular code, it is fine, but why do we want to do so? So the answer is generally you are not going to print anything always, but let's say that if you are using some kind of resource, obviously at the end you want to close the resource irrespective whether there was some exception or no. Hence at those times this thing is helpful. So let's see it with the next example. So what we will do is we will just move to our service IMPL2, and here also let me just say service impl2 in this one like this. Let's say Control Shift O. So here we are. So this time we have moved here to our service impl2. Now in this one, if you see here, we are having something like a custom source. So first of all, let me show you what is there. So I have a utility package where I have a class custom resource, which simply contains two methods and a default constructor. So in the default constructor, this means whenever I will be creating object, it will say the resource is started. Then I'll call process, it will say it is processing, and I will call close, which means it is finished. Now in the real world, instead of custom resource, you may be working with some kind of database, you may be working with some kind of file, or you may be taking input from the user with the help of scanner. So at the end, you must be closing it. In between there will be some kind of processing, and obviously you are going to start this. So let's see how it works here. So what we are doing is, first of all, before the try block, we are creating the resource object. So it will say that it has started. Then here we are saying it is processing. So obviously we will say processing only when there is no exception. So here we are saying processing, and at the end we are closing. But again, what are the chances that it is going to be closed? The answer is the chances are almost negligible if we directly write like this, because if I execute it, so you will see that for my scenario 1, it will say custom resource started, then there was no exception, so it said custom resource processing, then this line got printed, and then it says custom resource finished, which is fine. For the second one, it just started. Since some exception occurred, so it didn't printed the processing, but that is fine. But I at least want it to close, which didn't close me. So again, what is the way to close? Something which we learnt just now. What we will do is, we will keep it in the finally block here. So we will say finally, and we will call it like this, Control Shift O, Control Shift F, finally, and let's execute it again. So you see, this time for the second one, it started, then it came here, it printed the exception, and before throwing the exception again, it closed the resource. So this is the best use case of having the finally block. Whenever you want to close resources, you do it with the help of a finally block, because there is a guarantee that it is going to be executed always, irrespective the scenario was happy or bad. Now, do we need to go for this service impl3? The answer is no, because I just wanted to show you that only. I've already made the changes in the previous demo, so no need for that. So let's move with the next demo, which is our demo number 7, guys. Now in the demo 7, let's see what do we have. So we will first go to calculator service. This is the one. Now we will go to service impl1, which is here, and you just see that we are writing the final block, and then you see this is the demo. So this is the case here. Now let's go back here. Now just think, why did we wrote the finally block? We wrote the final block because we wanted to close the resource. Now imagine that instead of closing one resource, or instead of you are using a single resource, let's say you are using something like 10 different resources of let's say you are using some scanner, you are using some file, you are using some database also. Now at the end, it is your duty, it is your responsibility to close all those resources in the order which you are using them, which means that if there are 10 resources which you need to close, so your final block will have almost 10 lines. Now just again think, why did we wrote the final block? Because we just need to close the resource always. So hence this time it is becoming problematic for us, because more the number of resources, we need to close all of them, and it is consuming almost more number of lines, almost 10 lines for closing 10 resources, which is going to make your code bigger by time. So the solution is that whatever the resources we have, we can, what if like all the resources get closed automatically? So let's see how is it possible. So what we will do is, after the try block, we will just say here custom resource. So this is something different. Till now we haven't seen. After the try, we are giving some brackets and there we are passing the custom resource. So we have created it and then we are passing. But this code is not working. And after this, why I have written it? So that I don't need to write the finally block. So I'm removing the finally block now. But still the code is not working here, guys. So what is the problem? The problem is that this is possible only when your resource is going to implement auto closable interface. So here we have something like implements, and here we will say auto, and let me say control space. So this is auto closable. So this is the one. Now this auto closable is an interface which contains a close method. That's the reason deliberately I call the close method. And what is the benefit? Now if I go to service IMPL, you saw the error is gone. And now if I execute the code from here, let me just execute, then you will come to know the benefit of doing that. So if you see here, in this first scenario, we started, then it came to processing, and then this got finished. Even when I'm not using the close method explicitly in the finally, it happened automatically. In scenario 2, it started and then some exception through here which needs to be handled here, but it closed the resource automatically. Now it doesn't matter for me whether it is going to print this line first or it is going to close. What I just want is to close the resource if any exception occurs. So hence this is fine for me. But how did this magic happen? The magic happened because of this try. So we call it as try with resources. So this is your try block, but with the resources here, guys. And what it does basically is that it provides you the finally block. So it helps to close all the resources on its own. And it is very helpful when you are having multiple resources. Now you don't need to write a finally block just to close all the resources at the end. And hence it is saving your number of lines. So this means that after every try block, it is going to execute your finally block, irrespective there was any exception or not. And for this, the only thing which you need to remember is that your resource should implement auto closable interface. Then only you can close them. Otherwise, it is not possible. Now you will say that, okay, is it possible that we can still write a finally block? So let's see. So we will say something like this, sys out, and let's say custom finally. So let's see, is it still possible that we can write a custom finally? Let's execute. So the answer is yes, it is still possible. So your finally block will always be executed after the default finally block of try with resources. So that is the point. But remember, your finally block executes after the catch block. Their finally block executes before the catch block. So this is something which you need to remember here. So this is the one, but as I told you, this is always helpful when you are working with resources, and as a good practice from now onwards, whenever you are working with any resource, so try to go with your try with resources instead of closing them explicitly, because then you don't need to worry about the order or anything. Now let's move on with the next. So you see, I have one more resource here, something like this, and that is auto closable also. So there I have written as custom resource to started processing and close. Everything is same. So let's go for this second IMPL, that is IMPL 1, and let me call here also IMPL 1 so that we can execute it. So in the IMPL 1, everything is looking still same. If I execute it, it will just close the resource, so there is nothing new. So the point is, what if we have multiple resources here? So let's say this is custom resource 2, and let's call here also 2, and let's call here also 2. So Control Shift O and this. Now how you are going to pass on here? You want to pass 2 resources here. So the answer is, you just need to have a comma separated resources like this, custom and then you will say resource 2. So like this. And what is the mistake? So I guess there is some spelling mistake, so I have written here custom, then I'm saying custom resource 2. so this is fine, but what is the issue? So it says cannot be resolved. Okay, so that means I cannot pass a comma here, because then it is not possible for it. So what I need to do is I need to pass a semicolon. So whenever there are multiple resources, instead of a comma, you need to pass a semicolon. So always you need to remember. Do we need to pass a semicolon after the last resource? That is optional. So if you pass, it is fine. If you don't pass, then also fine. But in between, you need to pass. So this is there. Now, this time it is going to close both the resources on its own automatically. And here also let's call the process method for both of them so that we can see the line. But what is going to be the way of closing both the resources? What is going to be their order? Will it close resource 1 first and then 2, or is it going to be the reverse way? Let's see. So I have executed it. Let's say scenario 1. So it says resource started, resource 2 started. Because I have passed resource 2 later on. Then resource is processing. So this line got printed. Then resource 2 is processing. Now this can be in any order depending what way you are writing. Now it is going to close resource 2 first and then resource 1. So this is something which you need to remember again here. Always the behavior of closing the resource by try with resources is the reverse order of starting them. So since you have passed resource 1 and then resource 2, so it assumes that resource 1 depends on your resource 2, and hence resource 2 needs to be closed first. So it is going to close it first. You cannot change the order. So in case of exception also, it is going to close resource 2 first and then the actual resource it is going to close. So this is something with the multiple resource, and this way you can have any number of resources. The only thing to remember is that all of them should be auto closable. And the best thing is that in Java, most of the resources which you will be using, all of them are going to implement auto closable, which means you can easily use try with resources with them. You don't need to worry that how you are going to extend auto closable in them or doing what. You just need to use try with resources there. So this is the way here. Another thing to remember here is that this kind of code of passing the variable in the try block will work only if you are using Java 9 or more. If your version is less than Java 9, then this code is not going to work. Before Java 9, it was mandatory to create the object also within this try brackets. So if it is a Java 8 version, then you need to write something like this. Or let me just create a new service IMPL for this and show you there. So this is service IMPL 2. So if you are going for less than Java 9, then you need to write something like this. Custom resource 2, and then you need to say equals to this, and here initially you may call it as null, and here this will be like something copy, and let's just paste it here, and let's say something like this. And here also, I mean, it needs to be whole thing here only as it is, if I remember correctly. So you need to just say like this, custom resource, and not 2 times equal to symbol. Now these 2 lines are not needed, and let me just say Control Shift O, Control Shift F. So this is the one, and here also let me pass on this particular thing, or yeah, not that, but here I need to say custom resource 2. So if it is less than Java 9, then you need to write something like this. So obviously you will say this is looking more complex now, but yeah, that is the reason. And hence, since Java 9 onwards, they say that you can create a resource first and then you can just pass on the references of those resources. So that is possible. So now better to use the previous way only. So that is fine. Rest everything will remain same. There is no change. Now let's go with our final demo, and this time let's see what do we have. So this is the calculator service, this is the demo, and here let me just remove this get message part. Let's just say exception, and this is your service IMPL here, guys. Again you will say it is IO exception, so this we have just now learned. So yes, this we learned, but still let's execute and see what happens. Okay, let me execute this demo only. So I've selected and I'm executing. So it says this is 2 and 5 and it is IO exception. So yeah, that is fine. But the point is, this time I don't want to throw IO exception. I want to throw something like some other exception maybe. I want to throw the exception. Is that possible? Let's see. So we didn't throw the exception earlier. So let's see. So okay, here it is possible, but here it is not. The reason? Because in the parent also I need to mention here exception. So yeah, this is fine. And again, if I execute, if I run, it says it is exception. So that is fine. Can I say that instead of exception, can I say it is scale up India exception? Let's see. Let's check out. So here, first of all, it says the scale up India exception is not found. Okay. So if I hover over to this, it simply says it cannot be resolved. The answer is Java doesn't knows about this. Scale up India was created after Java, not before Java. So they didn't knew about it. Hence they didn't create any exception as such. So what we can do is we can create our own exception. So let's do that. So let me just copy the name, and what I'll do is I'll say new. Let me create a class like we do always, because as you know, all the exceptions are classes only. And let's give the package name as exception. Let's say finish. So this is the one. And now is it still giving the exception? So the answer is yes, it is still giving me the exception here, even though the name and everything is fine, but exception is still there. Then now only saying scale up India exception doesn't going to make this as exception. We need to extend the exception class. So here we will say extends exception. So this is the way. Now it is giving us some warning, but as of now, if you wish, you can ignore the warning, or you can just hover over to this and you can say add default serial version ID. So this is the one. Now this is not needed as of now to learn what it is. Whenever we are going to work with the serialization in some other video, there I'll explain more about this. But as of now, you can ignore, and you just need to hover over that and you need to select this so that it can provide you a default version ID. So this is the one. Now what is left? Is it still giving the exception? The answer is yes, it is still giving us an exception. So let's check out here. And why is it giving? Let me say Ctrl Shift O. So it has stopped giving because that was the mistake. So yeah, it is giving, and now this is fine, guys. So this time we can throw a scale up India exception. Let me execute, and this is the one. So you see, in the exception name, it is throwing our name, scale up India exception, which is fine here. If you wish, you can create the constructor also of it. Otherwise, you know, as Java provides you the default constructor, so no need of it. So this is working absolutely fine. Now let's go for its service IMPL 1, and here what we will do is, if you wish, you can throw the specific one also. That is also fine. So this time you see, in the parent I'm throwing the exception, but in child I'm throwing less than that. So that is fine. You cannot go beyond, but you can have a smaller exception. So this time here, let's say again the same message, cannot divide, and then here let's say array of 0, and then here let's say by, and then we will say here array of 1. So this is the one, because we remember earlier also we were passing messages like this. So this time also let's pass, but this is not working. Why? Because this is your exception, and in your exception you don't have any constructor which can accept the arguments. So we need to create the one. So let's create one. So let's say public, and let me just copy this name from here, let me paste it here, and let's do like this and something here, and let's say this. So Control Shift O, Control Shift F. So this is my default constructor, and let me make a parameterized. Why I need a default? So that my other code doesn't start giving me the error. So I need both of them, and here I will say I can have some message. So this is fine, guys. Now let's execute it again, but this time with service IMPL 1. So let's execute and see what it says. So it is still same, but everything went well. This time I'm using service IMPL 1, there I'm passing message, there is no error, this is still same. How can I print the message? Do I need to say here something like sysout? Let's see if that works for me. So I'll say here sysout message, and let me execute it again. So I'll say run. So it printed, so the message got printed here first, but I want like this, I want it somewhere here after the exception, like it used to work for the null pointer exception, IO exception, and all other exceptions. So for that you don't need to say sysout message. Instead you need to call super, and then you need to pass on message there. So what we are basically doing here, we are calling the parent constructor of it, that is the exception, constructor of exception, and there we are passing the message. So you don't need to take a burden of printing that, you just need to pass it on to the parent so that it behaves the default way. Now you see the exception message is getting printed after exception, like it worked for the null pointer, arithmetic, or even the IO exception. So this is the correct way of working with the custom exceptions. Another thing you see here is that this is a checked exception. Why? Because I directly extended the exception class. If you want to make it a unchecked exception, you need to extend the runtime exception. But the point is that generally we always go for the checked exceptions only whenever we are creating custom, because there is no meaning of it if you are saying I will create a custom exception, but then it is a choice of a developer to handle or not handle it. If you are creating, which means you want it to be handled always. Hence you should always make it a checked exception, and you can have any kind of message, but still it is going to be a string only, and the way to use them is same. Just you need to say throw new, the exception, here you need to say throws, here you can give the specific message, specific exception, or the parent exception also. So that's it guys with this particular video of exceptions. I hope you find it useful, and if yes, please give it a like and please subscribe the channel, and next time we will come up with some other video. Thanks everyone.